Welcome to Snoozecast, the podcast designed to help you fall asleep. On Snoozecast, we read excerpts from public domain works and occasionally original stories. We'd like to thank our listeners. If you enjoy our show, please be sure to subscribe and also share it with a friend. The best place to listen to us is on our website, snoozecast.com. From there, you'll be able to download or play single episodes without having to change any autoplay settings on your device or in your podcast directory. This episode is brought to you by all the cats out there so relaxed their tongues stick out a little bit. Originally published in 1906, Cattle Brands by Andy Adams is a collection of short stories best heard around a campfire. This tale, called Drifting North, is a brief anecdote of the troubles a band of cowpunchers run into while moving a herd through some dangerous country. The author, whose most famous work is Log of a Cowboy, writes from personal experience. Adams spent 10 years driving cattle on western trails in Texas during the 1880s. Let's get cozy. Close your eyes. Relax your body into the softness of your bed. Now, take a few deep breaths. It was a wet, bad year on the old Western Trail. From Red River north and all along was herd after herd waterbound by high water in the rivers. Our outfit lay over nearly a week on the South Canadian, but we were not alone, for there were 5 other herds waiting for the river to go down. This river had tumbled over her banks for days, and the driftwood that was coming down would have made it dangerous swimming for cattle. We were expected to arrive in Dodge early in June, but when we reached the North Fork of the Canadian, we were 2 weeks behind time. Old George Carter, the owner of the herd, was growing very impatient about us, for he had had no word from us after we had crossed Red River at Donan's Crossing. Other cowmen, lying around Dodge, who had herds on the trail, could hear nothing from their men, but in their experience and confidence in their outfits, guessed the cause. It was water. Our surprise when we came opposite Camp Supply to have Carter and a stranger ride out to meet us was not to be measured. They had got impatient waiting and had taken the mail buckboard to Supply, making inquiries along the route for the Hat herd, which had not passed up the trail, so they were assured. Carter was so impatient that he could not wait, as he had a prospective buyer on his hands, and the delay in the appearing of the herd was very annoying to him. Old George was as tickled as a little boy to meet us all. The cattle were looking as fine as silk. The layovers had rested them. The horse were in good trim, considering the amount of wet weather we had had. The cattle were 2s and 3s. We had left western Texas with a few other 3,200 head, and were none shy. We could have counted out more, but on some of them the Hat brand had possibly faded out. We went into a cozy camp early in the evening. Everything needful was at hand: wood, water, and grass. Cowmen in those days prided themselves on their outfits, and Carter was a trifle gone on his men. With the cattle on hand, drinking was out of the question, so the only way to show us any regard was to bring us a box of cigars. He must have brought those cigars from Texas, for they were wrapped in a copy of the Fort Worth Gazette. It was a month old and full of news. Every man in the outfit read and reread it. There were several train robberies reported in it, But that was common in those days. They had nominated for governor the little cavalrymen, Saul Ross, and this paper estimated that his majority would be at least 200,000. We were all anxious to get home in time to vote for him. Theodore Bagman was foreman of our outfit. Bag was a typical trail boss. He had learned to take things as they came, play the cards as they fell, and not fret himself about little things that could not be helped. If we had been a month behind, he would never have thought to explain the why or wherefore to old man Carter. Several years after this, when he was scouting for the army, he rode up to a herd over on the Chisholm Trail and asked one of the tailmen, "Son, have you seen anything about those 300 soldiers?" "No," said the cowboy. "Well," said Bag, "I've lost about that many." That night around camp, the smoke was curling upward from those cigars in clouds. When supper was over and the guards arranged for the night, storytelling was in order. This cattle buyer with us lived in Kansas City and gave us several good ones. He told us of an attempted robbery of a bank, which had occurred a few days before in a western town. As a prelude to the tale, he gave us the history of the robbers. "Cow Springs, Kansas," said he, "earned the reputation honestly of being a hard cow town. When it became the terminus of one of the many eastern trails, it was at its worst. Well, the first few months he filled the office of marshal and had the people thoroughly buffaloed. When the cattle season had ended and winter came on, the little town grew tame and listless. There was no man to dare him to shoot, and he longed for other worlds to conquer. He had won his way into public confidence with his little gun, but this confidence reposed in him was misplaced, for he proved his own double both in morals and courage. To show you the limit of the confidence he enjoyed, the treasurer of the Cherokee Strip Cattle Association paid rent money at their capital, $50,000 quarterly. The capital is not located on any railroad, so the funds and currency were taken in regularly by the treasurer and turned over to the authorities. This trip was always made with secrecy, and the marshal was taken along as a trusted guard. It was an extremely dangerous trip to make, as it was through a country infested with robbers, and the capital at least 100 miles from the railroad. Strange, no one ever attempted to rob the stage or private conveyance, although this sum was taken in regularly for several years. The average robber was careful of his person and could not be included to make a target of himself for any money consideration. Where there was danger of a gun in the hands of a man that would shoot rapidly and carelessly. Before the herds began to reach as far north, the marshal and his deputy gave some excuse and disappeared for a few days, which was quite common and caused no comment. One fine morning, the good people of the town, where the robbery was attempted, were thrown into an uproar at the opening hour. The robbers were none other than our trusted marshal, his deputy, and a cowpuncher who had been led into the deal. When they ordered the officials of the bank to stand in a row with hands up, they were nonplussed at their refusal to comply. This proved bad policy, for when the smoke cleared away, the cashier, a very popular man, was found dead, while an assistant was dangerously wounded. This unexpected refusal and the consequent shooting spoiled the plans of the robbers, so that they abandoned the robbery and ran to their horses. After mounting, they parleyed with each other a moment and seemed bewildered as to which way they should ride, finally riding south toward what seemed a broken country. Very few minutes elapsed before every man who could find a horse was joining the posse that was forming to pursue them. Before they were out of sight, the posse had started after them. They were well mounted, and as determined a set of men as were ever called upon to meet a similar emergency. They had the decided advantage of the robbers, as their horses were fresh, and the men knew every foot of the country. The broken country to which the holdups headed was a delusion as far as safety was concerned. They were never for a moment out of sight of the pursuers, and this broken country ended in a deep coulee. When the posse saw them enter this, they knew that their capture was only a matter of time. Nature seemed against the robbers, for as they entered the coulee, their horses bogged down in a springy rivulet, and they were so hard pressed that they hastily dismounted and sought shelter in some shrubbery that grew about. The pursuing party, now swollen to quite a number, had spread out, and by this time surrounded the men. They were seen to take shelter in a clump of wild plum brush, and the posse closed in on them. Seeing the numbers against them, they came out on demand and surrendered. Neither the posse nor themselves knew at this time that the shooting in the bank had killed the cashier, and the identity of the prisoners was soon established by citizens who knew the marshal and his deputy. The latter admitted their identity. That afternoon they were photographed, and later in the day were given a chance to write to any friends to whom they wished to say goodbye. The cowpuncher was the only one who availed himself of the opportunity. He wrote to his parents. He was the only one of the trio who had the nerve to write, and seemed the only one who realized the enormity of his crime. As darkness settled over the town, the mob assembled. There was no demonstration. The men were taken quietly out. There was a remarkable variety of nerve shown. The marshal and deputy were limp, unable to stand on their feet. The boy who had thought that day written his parents his last letter met his fate with stoicism. He cursed the crouching figures of his partners for enticing him into this crime, and begged them not to die like curs, but to meet bravely the fate which he admitted they all deserved. Several of the men in the mob came forward and shook hands with him. Such nerve is seldom met in life, and those that are supposed to have it, when they come face to face with their end, are found lacking that quality. It is a common anomaly in life that the bad man, with his record, often shows the white feather when he meets his fate at the hands of an outraged community. We all took a friendly liking to the cattle buyer. He was an interesting talker. While he was a city man, he mixed with us with a certain freedom and abandon that was easy and natural. We all regretted it the next day when he and the old man left us. "Well, if it's just the same to you," replied Port, lighting a fresh cigar, "I'll not try, for I'm well enough satisfied as to how it would turn out without testing it." "Isn't it strange," said Batshaw, "that if you trust a man or put confidence in him, he won't betray you? Now that marshal, 1 month he was guarding money at the risk of his life, and the next was losing it, someone trying to rob him. I remember a similar case down on the Rio Grande. It was during the boom in sheep a few years ago, when everyone got crazy over sheep. A couple of Americans came down on the river to buy sheep. These sheep buyers asked their banker to get them a man who spoke Spanish and knew the country as a guide. The banker sent and got a man that he could trust, whose appearance would not recommend him anywhere. He was accepted, and they set out to be gone over a month. They bought a band of sheep, and it was necessary to pay for them at a point some 40 miles further up the river. There had been some robbing along the river, and these men felt uneasy about carrying the money to this place to pay for the sheep. The banker came to the rescue by advising them to send the money. It looked risky, but the banker, who knew the nature of the business, urged it as the better way. The peon was brought in. The situation was explained to him, and he was ordered to be in readiness at nightfall to start on his errand. He carried the money over 40 miles that night and delivered it safely in the morning to the proper parties. This act of his aroused the admiration of these sheepmen beyond a point of safety. They paid for the sheep, were gone for a few months, sold out their flocks to good advantage, and came back to buy more. This second time, they did not take the precaution to have the banker hire the man, but did so themselves, intending to deposit their money with a different house farther up the river. They confided to him that they had quite a sum of money with them, and that they would deposit it with the same merchant